Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us Kamlesh Lad, Chief Architect at CloudCasa by Catalogic. Kamlesh, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Today, in general, we are going to talk about use cases and challenges for cross-cluster migration of Kubernetes workloads. But before we get started, I would like to hear, your insights, your thoughts into what can what leads to enterprise Kubernetes deployments to have so many clusters?
Yeah, so several reasons why, just from an operations standpoint, your current cluster, you could have hit scaling limits. So you want to, separate your workloads out to a different cluster. You may want to reduce your complexity, so you're running your applications in siloed fashion, or even geo separation. So you want to keep your clusters in different locations, maybe closer to where your user base is, and also maybe for redundancy, have different clusters. In addition to operations, you also have your CI/CD pipeline and workflow where you'll have a separate production, separate staging, separate development and QA environment. You want to keep those separate. Obviously, you don't want your devs to go play in your production environment. And then you have hybrid environments as well, where you may have clusters on-prem and the cloud. So, a lot of reasons there.
When we do talk about, a lot of clusters, we also live in a multi-cloud hybrid cloud world. So are these clusters also spread across different clouds as well?
Yeah, definitely. So, even you can have on-prem going to some clusters on-prem, some clusters in the cloud. And even within the cloud, there's, several cloud vendors that provide Kubernetes services. And then even within a single cloud, you may want to even segregate your clusters by different accounts. You don't want all your eggs in one basket. You keep things separate by application.
Excellent. And as these, clusters are created, are deployed. Can you also talk about what are some of the common use cases that you see in production for data migration across clusters?
Yeah, a lot of use cases there. So just one example is let's say you want to upgrade your cluster infrastructure. That's a compute and storage. You may want to move your workloads are running on that cluster to the new storage. You may also want to, move your workloads to a new data center or a region, or, examples, you're on-prem, you want to migrate to the cloud, or even move between cloud vendors. And then another big use case is like dev test, as part of your continuous integration and continuous development is you may want to clone production workloads to your development and QA environments. This way, developers and QA folks can actually test on real world data. And this way, it's partitioned off. You don't want to give them access to the production data directly, but this is a really good use case for migrating and cloning workloads. Another case, let's say if your current cluster is overloaded, you may want to granularly move certain workloads to a different cluster. So that's among the primary use cases there for migration.
Excellent. Thanks for explaining that. Now, if you look at Kubernetes, it is already quite complicated. There are so many moving parts. There are so many sub-projects that are within there that helps once we get started. When we look at, this kind of migration, considering the fact that Kubernetes clusters have so many different components, what are the components of the Kubernetes cluster that need to be moved that you cannot migrate without moving them?
Right. So there's several, application usually is made up of metadata that's stored in your etcd, your config maps, your secrets, etc. That's kind of your metadata. Then you have the persistent volumes. That's where your persistent data is kept, and you want to keep all those as a unit when you're trying to migrate it over, right? So, and there's some challenges there as well.
Right. So let's talk about challenges, or what kind of patterns you have seen where customers run into those specific problems when they try to move or duplicate workloads across different clusters.
Yeah, so some of the challenges are, Kubernetes clusters don't really talk to each other. They're almost like islands unto themselves. There's no communications between them, no networking. The storage is usually not shared. And that's usually by design, right? You want to keep applications isolated. So, you definitely have challenges in terms of, hey, how do I take that persistent volume or that the etcd data and expose it in a way I can move it to a different cluster. Most cluster, most environments, you don't expose your persistent volumes or your etcd database to the public network. It's usually an internal node network. So you need a way to actually move these. You probably need an intermediate storage in between to move this data. There's no networking between the clusters, so you need an easy way to do that as well. So it could be tedious. And then on top of that, you may not want to move the entire cluster. You may just want to move granular workloads. So you have to pay attention to that as well.
There are a lot of tools that are there to help assist with these migrating these workloads. Can you talk about what are the things, what are tools that are there, and how folks are currently trying to manage these migrations?
Okay, sure. Yeah, there's several open source tools and commercial tools. Just an example of an open source tool, there's Velero and Restic. It does require a lot of manual setup. It requires your own infrastructure. You have to have your own storage that multiple clusters can communicate with, and it just a lot of manual tooling there. In terms of commercial tools, obviously, we're a producer of CloudCasa.io. It's a fully managed SaaS service dedicated for Kubernetes backup and migration. All you do is deploy a lightweight agent to each of your clusters, and we host the entire infrastructure, including the storage. And we make things efficient by doing dedupe compression and network throttling, so it doesn't affect your production cluster while we're doing any of these backup and migrations. Also it has a self-service UI and RBAC. This is pretty important if you're doing dev tests or workflows where you can give your developers granular permissions to, for example, clone your production workload to a dev test cluster and not the other way around. That way they're not affecting production clusters. And we also have really tight integration with EKS, for example, and AKS. So in addition to backing up and migrating the etcd and persistent volumes, we also take care of the actual EKS envelope and metadata. So on the restore migration, will automatically create a EKS or AKS server cluster.
We have talked about the problem area, and you also touched upon how CloudCasa is helping, but the whole point is to help developers with this problem. So talk about how CloudCasa is helping with some of these migration and to kind of make it easier for folks.
Yeah. So one of the things that CloudCasa does is it's a fully managed SaaS service. So there's no need for cluster admins or developers to set up their own environment. It's all hosted by us. You get an easy to use web UI, and we do have granular RBAC permissions, so you can go ahead and give certain permissions to your developers or members of your team to do specific tasks. So there's a lot of self-service involved there as well. And again, we make things as efficient as possible in the sense that when you're migrating or backing up large amounts of data, you want to make sure your production is not affected. So we have network and storage I/O throttling. That way, when these large data transfers happen, you're not affecting the production. We also do smart dedupe compression and also keep your data safe while we're migrating to full encryption. So again, our main premise is we want to make it as easy as possible, low friction solution, very easy to use.
Now, is it possible for you to just show us how CloudCasa kind of does this help with this migration, specifically for AWS clusters?
Yeah, sure. So I'll go through a workflow where we'll go migrate a cluster from one AWS account to another AWS account, and the neat things CloudCasa does there. So if you notice on the screen, it's our web UI. As soon as you log in, you get a nice dashboard. So let's go to the next slide here. So the first thing you want to do is just link your AWS accounts to CloudCasa, and we make it very simple. All you do is we launch a simple CloudFormation script that gives us permission to access the account. So a very simple onboarding. So now, once you have your clusters, for example, here we have a source and target cluster. We're going to go ahead and register those into CloudCasa. Here, it's a EKS cluster, and all you do is go to a register button, copy and paste a kubectl command we provide, and that'll go ahead and push a lightweight agent into your cluster. So it's very simple onboarding. So here we're going to actually back up the test website from workload from the source cluster. So if you notice here is our backup definition. You can back up the entire cluster, or in this case, we're just looking at a granular migration. So we just want to move this workload, test website workload. So pretty simple, and you run it. Once our backup is done, now we can actually restore or migrate this test website to our target cluster. So you just hit restore, and at this point, you'll get a nice wizard. And if you don't already have an EKS cluster, we'll actually automatically create one for you, or you can use the existing one. And something I want to point out, something here CloudCasa does for you automatically is our source cluster had an EBS storage class only, and our target only has GP2, so we'll do the translation between the storage classes while we're doing the migration. So we have intelligent things like that to make it migration as automatic as possible. And then just as simple as that, we've moved our workload from source to target cluster with a couple of clicks.
Kamlesh, thank you so much for taking time out today and not only talk about the challenges that are there that comes with so many Kubernetes clusters, and of course migrate data workloads across those clusters. Thanks for sharing those insights, and I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Great, thanks for having me.